At 13:29 hours, a drone launched from Iran's southern coast and turned directly toward the USS Abraham Lincoln, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier with 5,700 Americans on board. While Iranian operators thought this was another boring mission to capture some footage to turn it into a propaganda video, this would all change in a matter of seconds. Unknown to them, an F-35C stealth fighter from Main Fighter Attack Squadron 14, the Black Knights, was already vectoring onto an intercept course from behind and above. No radar, no radio calls, no emissions of any kind. The F-35 had been on combat patrol 30 miles east when the strike group vectored it toward the contact, and the pilot didn't accelerate or light up a single sensor. The approach would be entirely passive because the F-35 had something the Shahed 139 had no way to detect or counter, and it only worked if the Iranians never knew it was there. The F-35's distributed aperture system represents one of the most advanced sensory technologies in modern aviation. 6 infrared cameras mounted flush around the airframe stitch together a seamless 360-degree thermal picture and project it directly into the pilot's helmet visor. These cameras detect heat passively, meaning the F-35 sees a target the way a security camera sees a burglar in the dark without turning on a light or making a sound. To the IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps operators watching the satellite feedback in Iran, their screen showed a perfectly routine reconnaissance flight. Open sky, calm seas, the carrier formation growing slowly in the frame. They had no idea a stealth fighter had parked behind their drone like a highway patrol car sitting in the median of a highway. Every second they didn't know, the F-35's passive sensors were quietly cataloging everything. Every frequency the drone's satellite link transmitted on, every command protocol its controller used, every electronic emission its sensor package radiated. The satellite uplink alone was gold. Once you know the frequency, the modulation, and the encryption handshake, you don't just track one drone. You track every drone in the fleet that uses the same data link architecture. Iran had sent a drone to spy on the carrier. The carrier had sent something much worse to spy on the drone. By 13:34 hours, the pilot was close enough for the F-35's electro-optical targeting system, a high-resolution infrared and optical camera housed under the nose, to resolve the drone in detail. Now, the strike group finally had what the E-2D Hawkeye orbiting at 25,000 feet couldn't provide from 50 miles out, a close-up look at those hardpoints. The report went back to the carrier. Shahed 139 confirmed. Hardpoint configuration ambiguous. Possible missile rails, but no positive weapon identification. That answer made the commander's problem harder, not easier. The Shahed 139 isn't one of Iran's disposable Shahed 136 kamikaze drones. It's their best attempt at building a Predator, a full-size reconnaissance platform with a 2,000-kilometer range launched from deep inside Iran, where the operators were completely untouchable. Its hardpoints could carry up to 4 guided missiles, or camera pods, or sensor packages. A confirmed weapons load would have simplified everything. Armed drone inbound, shoot it down, end of discussion. An empty airframe would have simplified it too. Surveillance flight, keep collecting, let it go. What the pilot was describing was the gray zone between the two, that murky middle ground where the rules of engagement become infinitely more complex. The drone was advancing a football field closer every second the Navy hesitated to shoot it down. Meanwhile, the Hawkeye track had pushed through the cooperative engagement capability, the network that connects every ship and aircraft in the strike group in one shared tactical picture. So when one sensor sees a target, every weapon system in the formation can engage it. 3 Arleigh Burke destroyers escorting the Lincoln lock fire control solutions automatically on a propeller drone doing the speed of highway traffic. These are ships designed to intercept ballistic missiles at Mach 8. Pointing them at a Shahed 139 was like aiming a fire hose at a birthday candle. But the computers don't care about proportionality, solve equations, and weight. The firepower was ready. The decision wasn't. Iran has every legal right to fly in international airspace. Nuclear talks were scheduled 3 days from now. Shooting down a surveillance drone before negotiations would hand Iran exactly the grievance it wanted, a propaganda windfall, and a reason to walk away from the table with the moral high ground. Not shooting it down meant Iranian cameras were getting sharper imagery of the carrier with every kilometer it closed. Somewhere between those two options was the narrow space where the commander had to make a call that would either protect his ship or hand a geopolitical gift to Iran 3 days before the most sensitive diplomatic talks of the year. The last time the Navy faced this exact dilemma was with the USS Harry S. Truman in 2016. Shahed 121 flight buzzed the flight deck and the Navy let it go. Iran bragged for months that they could surveil the American fleet whenever they felt like it. The IRGC posted the footage on state media like a trophy reel. The fallout from that decision has echoed through CENTCOM for a decade. This commander wasn't about to write the sequel. Now the clock was running in 2 directions simultaneously. Every second the F-35 shadowed the Shahed 139. Its passive sensors built a more complete electronic electronic profile, satellite frequencies, encryption patterns, command protocols. That data would let the entire U.S. fleet identify and track every Shahed 139 Iran put in the sky for years. Shooting early wasted collection time on an intelligence gold mine. But every second he waited, the drone closed another 42 meters, nearly 6,000 American lives. At current speed, the Shahed 139 would cross the resolution threshold in under 4 minutes. Every frame it captured would be operationally useful. Layouts, air positions, defensive configurations, the kind of imagery you build strike packages around. The F-35 had been collecting for nearly 5 minutes at this point, more than enough to build a comprehensive electronic fingerprint that U.S. intelligence would spend months exploiting. He could continue waiting to find out if it was hostile or not. They might never know until a weapon had left the rails. On top of this, the Truman precedent ended with a drone overflying the carrier and heralding the propaganda win. This commander chose a different ending. Authorization went down the chain of command and across the tactical net in 2 words: weapons free. The F-35 pilot didn't need to maneuver, didn't need to lock a radar. The AIM-9X block Sidewinder imaging infrared seeker had been staring at the Shahed 139's heat signature for minutes. The engine exhaust, the warm wings, the propeller disc glowing against cold ocean air. One trigger squeeze, and the missile came off the rail at just under Mach 3. The seeker, designed to lock onto maneuvering fighters, pulling 9 gears and pick them out from decoy flares, background clutter, and even the sun, found a propellerone flying in a straight line with no countermeasures, no jammer, and no ability to maneuver. Sending a Sidewinder after a Shahed 139 is like sending a cheetah after a house cat. The outcome was never in question. In Tehran, the satellite feed cut to static midframe. One moment, the carrier was growing in the frame. The next, nothing. Tasnim news agency would later claim they lost contact during a routine surveillance mission. They didn't mention the Sidewinder receipt or the 5-minute intelligence donation they never agreed to. But as U.S. intelligence began decrypting the Shahed 139 satellite uplink data, they found something the IRGC never intended to transmit. Embedded in the drone's command protocols were coordination timestamps synchronized to the minute with a second operation already underway 500 miles away. Iran hadn't sent a drone to spy on the carrier. They'd sent it to distract the carrier, and the F-35 had just stolen the proof. At 13:38 hours, minutes after the Sidewinder turned the Shahed 139 into falling debris, 6 fast attack contacts appeared on the Stena Imperialis bridge radar. Inbound at 40 knots from the Iranian coast, the tanker was 3 miles into the Strait of Hormuz, and at 15 knots, she had 24 minutes of exposure before reaching open water. The IRGC needed less than 15. At 13:39 hours, bridge lookouts confirmed the worst version of events. 6 fast attack craft in a V formation, low-slung fiberglass hulls built for one thing, bow-mounted 50 caliber machine guns with belts loaded and boarding equipment staged on the nearest deck, grappling hooks, ladders, armed men in tactical vests behind them. The Mohajer surveillance drone controlled at 5,000 feet, streaming everything into an IRGC command center that expected this wrapped up in 15 minutes in time for the evening news cycle. At 13:40 hours, the lead boat crossed the tanker's bow at 300 meters. A second ran down the port side close enough for the crew to see the gun team crouch behind the 50 caliber. The remaining 4 fanned into a rotating box, sealing every heading. Then the radio call came, accented English, no preamble. Stena Imperialis, stop your vessel immediately. Prepare to be boarded. The IRGC had done this before. They seized the Stena Imperialis in 2019. Same shipping company, same water, and held the crew for 71 days while the world issued statements and did nothing useful. They'd grabbed the Advantage Suite, the Naomi, the St. Nicholas. Same formula every time. Surround board. Present a hostage crisis that takes months to unwind. But the formula depended on one thing finishing before anyone with real firepower showed up. At 13:41 hours, the Stena Imperialis's captain did 2 things that merchant captains in piracy zones are trained to do. He pushed to full power and he fought back. Fire hoses pressurized to 120 psi, capable of knocking a man off his feet at 30 meters, went over the sides. Crew members directed the streams at any boat that tried to come alongside. The helmsman threw the rudder hard to port, then starboard, creating a churning wake that turned the approach into a rodeo, any boat crew trying to hold steady long enough to throw a grappling hook. At the same time, the captain keyed Channel 16, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Stena Imperialis in the Strait of Hormuz. See military vessels attempting to board, requesting immediate assistance. 15 knots against boats that could do 50. Running wasn't an escape plan. It was a way to keep the ship moving while praying someone was close enough to hear that call. At 13:43 hours, the IRGC boats tightened the circle. An Iranian crewman on the lead boat hurled a grappling hook toward the Stena Imperialis's deck rail. It bounced off the hull and splashed into the churning wake as the tanker heeled through another evasive turn. A second boat tried to come alongside the port quarter and caught a fire hose stream directly into the wheelhouse at close range. The boat sheared off, circled, and came back. These crews had done this before and a fire hose wasn't going to stop them, but it was buying time. The question was how much time the tanker had left to buy. The IRGC needed maybe 5 more minutes to get a boarding team over the rail. The tanker's crew needed someone with a bigger stick to show up faster than that. The IRGC's timing was calculated, not reckless. The Lincoln had spent the morning dealing with a drone now scattered across the Arabian Sea. A Super Hornet at full afterburner needs close to an hour to cover 500 miles, and the IRGC needed less than 15 minutes. By the time carrier aircraft arrived, the tanker could be under Iranian control, and Iran would have an American crewed vessel as leverage for nuclear talks scheduled 3 days later. Was sound, but only if the aircraft carrier was the only American asset within range. It wasn't. At 13:44 hours, the guided missile destroyer USS McFaul went to flank speed 12 nautical miles southeast. She was there because the Navy learned from the Stena Imperialis humiliation in 2019. After that seizure, CENTCOM started rotating destroyers into the strait independent of whatever the nearest carrier was doing, specifically so the next attempted boarding would meet a warship instead of a press release. The McFaul had been shadowing every friendly merchant she could for weeks. At plus 30 knots, she was roughly 20 minutes from the tanker, and at the 12-mile mark, already well within range of her Mark 45 5-inch gun, which fires a 70-pound guided projectile every 3.75 seconds at targets up to 13 nautical miles out. The McFaul could have hit these boats for several minutes before she started moving. The reason she hadn't was strategic. Turning 6 IRGC boats into floating debris would hand Iran exactly the confrontation it wanted, an excuse to close the strait and spike oil to $200 a barrel. Letting the boats run home empty accomplished more than a 5-inch gun ever could, but that required the boats to actually decide to run. At 13:45 hours, Channel 16, the same frequency the tanker's Mayday had gone out on, the frequency every vessel in the strait monitors, crackled with a new voice. American English, no hesitation. RGC vessels harassing merchant shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. This is United States Navy warship. You're conducting hostile action against a vessel under U.S. Navy escort. Break off immediately and return to port. On the Stena Imperialis's bridge, the captain heard that transmission and knew what it meant. So did his crew. They kept the hoses going and the rudder swinging. But for the first time in 7 minutes, the math had changed. On the IRGC boats, the commanders heard it too. The question was whether they believed it, whether there was actually an American warship close enough to matter, or whether this was a bluff from a destroyer hours away trying to buy time. At 13:46 hours, the horizon answered the question for them. The McFaul cleared into view, nearly 9,000 tons of American diplomacy cutting through the strait at flank speed. Bow wave throwing white water 20 feet high, and the Mark 45 5-inch gun barrel visibly trained in the direction of the IRGC formation. Above the formation, contrails from F-15E Strike Eagles out of Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, 300 to 350 miles away, carved white lines across the sky at 20,000 feet, sniper targeting pods already locked on the boats below. The IRGC had built their entire operation around the idea that distracting one aircraft carrier would leave the strait uncovered. They were now staring at the proof that it hadn't. The boarding attempts stopped, but the boats kept circling, too proud or too confused to break off, not brave enough to keep going with a 5-inch naval gun closing from the southeast and strike fighters stacked overhead. The McFaul's Mark 38 chain guns, 25mm automatic cannons on stabilized mounts that can chew through fiberglass holes the way a belt sander goes through plywood, track the nearest boat with the smooth mechanical patience of a weapon system that doesn't. Channel 16 crackled again. IRGC vessels. This is Coalition Warship 74. You have been warned. Break off now. The IRGC boat commanders could now see with their own eyes what their mission briefing had promised wouldn't be there. Their 50 caliber machine guns were designed for tanker bridge windows and unarmed merchant crews against the hull of a destroyer. A 50 caliber round leaves a scratch that a junior sailor buffs out with a paint roller during an afternoon. Their Mohajer drone had been circling with authority for 8 minutes and was now sharing airspace. F-15Es, whose pilots had spent 2 years shooting down Iranian-built drones over the Red Sea. The boarding ladders were still on deck because a tanker captain with fire hoses and a rudder had made sure they stayed there. And closing fast from the south was a destroyer whose 5-inch guns put 16 rounds per minute onto speedboat-sized targets at ranges the 50 caliber can't even dream of reaching. The situation had transformed dramatically in mere minutes. What began as an apparently routine surveillance mission by the IRGC had become a multi-layered confrontation that showcased the complexity of modern naval operations in contested waters. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard, operating under what they believed was sound strategic planning, had failed to account for the depth and sophistication of American naval presence in the region. They had assumed that a coordinated distraction using the surveillance drone to occupy the carrier's attention would leave the strait vulnerable to their seizure attempt. This assumption proved to be be a fundamental miscalculation that would define the entire engagement. The technological advantage possessed by the American forces was not merely quantitative but qualitative. While the Iranians operated with conventional sensors and relied on coordination through satellite feeds, the Americans had woven together a seamless network of detection systems that turned individual platforms into components of a unified whole. The F-35's ability to gather intelligence passively while remaining undetected represented a generational leap in warfare capability. The destroyer's integrated air defense system could coordinate targeting information from multiple sources simultaneously. The fighter jets overhead could detect and track targets at distances that rendered the Iranians' weapon systems obsolete. This integration created an environment where the IRGC's tactical options were severely constrained. At 13:49 hours, the lead boat broke formation and opened throttle toward the Iranian coast. 3 followed immediately, engines screaming at power settings these crews had probably never touched outside of training. The last 2 peeled off seconds later, and the disciplined V formation that had looked so formidable 11 minutes earlier scattered into 6 separate wakes, all pointed at Iran. The Mohajer drone dutifully recorded the whole retreat for an IRGC command center that had expected very different footage. The tactical situation had reversed completely. What was designed as an aggressive operation with a compressed timeline had become a fighting withdrawal. The IRGC boat crews, facing the prospect of engaging a destroyer that could outrange them by a factor of 200 and match their maneuverability with technological precision, made the only rational available to them. They disengaged. The McFaul escorted the Stena Imperialis through the remainder of the strait, crew safe, cargo intact, 1/5 of the world's oil still flowing through the choke point, as if the Iranians had never left port. The broader implications of this engagement rippled far beyond the immediate tactical situation. For the Iranian military, it represented a stark demonstration that American power projection in the region remained unmatched and that their operational planning, however carefully coordinated, could not account for the full spectrum of American capabilities. For the United States Navy, it validated the doctrine of maintaining distributed presence, the insight that forward-deployed forces operating and the carrier strike groups could respond to emerging threats with sufficient speed and firepower to influence outcomes before they crystallized into full-scale confrontations. The incident also illustrated the importance of institutional learning. The Navy's decision in 2016 to rotate destroyers through the strait specifically to prevent a recurrence of the Stena Imperialis seizure proved prescient. The lessons extracted from that earlier seizure, where Iranian forces held an American-flagged vessel for over 2 months, had been institutionalized into standing procedures and deployment patterns. This meant that the 2019 incident created the conditions for a different outcome in the current engagement. American commanders, remembering the cost of the previous seizure, had structured their presence to make future attempts too costly and too risky to execute successfully. The role of communications in the engagement cannot be understated. The initial Mayday call from the Stena Imperialis captain activated a response chain that was already prepared to receive it. The McFaul's commanding officer, aware that merchant vessels in the strait transmitted emergency calls on Channel 16, was monitoring that frequency as part of standard operating procedure. The radio warning issued by the McFaul, transmitted on an open channel, served multiple purposes simultaneously. It communicated directly to the IRGC boat crews that an American warship was in the vicinity. It informed the Iranian command center monitoring the operation that American forces had detected and were responding to the attempt. It provided legal justification for escalated response should the Iranians continue their approach, and it gave all parties involved, particularly neutral observers monitoring the situation, clear evidence that American warnings had preceded any use of force. The speed of the American response highlighted the extent to which naval forces, despite their enormous size and complexity, had become efficient at rapid decision-making in crisis situations. From the moment the merchant vessel transmitted its Mayday call until the McFaul appeared on the horizon, less than 7 minutes elapsed. In that time, the destroyer had to receive and interpret the distress signal, verify the location of the merchant vessel, calculate an intercept course, accelerate from what was presumably a normal transit speed to full emergency speed, and transit to a position within visual and weapons range of the threat. The sophistication required to execute this sequence in such a compressed time frame reflected years of training, doctrine refinement, and operational planning. The F-35 pilot's decision not to remain engaged with the destroyed Shed 139 target after firing the Sidewinder missile was also significant. Rather than staying in the vicinity of the engagement, the pilot likely executed a standard tactical maneuver to position for follow-on missions or egress from the area. This represented confidence in the weapons system's terminal guidance capability capability and also freed the aircraft to respond to other developing situations. In the fast-paced environment created by the simultaneous drone incursion and seizure attempt, maintaining flexibility in asset positioning proved valuable. Had the F-35 remained committed to the drone engagement area, it would have been unavailable for tasking to other missions or as backup for the maritime engagement developing to the south. The Mohajer drone operated by the IRGC represented a meaningful reconnaissance capability, but ultimately proved to be insufficient for the task assigned to it. Its value was purely observational. It could stream video and coordinate with other elements of the operation, but it possessed no organic defensive ability and no weapons. This limitation became apparent once American forces achieved superior tactical positioning. The drone circling at 5,000 feet while F-15E Strike Eagles operated at 20,000 feet with sensors and weapons ready was in an untenable position. Presence confirmed Iranian willingness to document their operation, which likely reflected confidence in their timeline and assumption of success. The presence of the drone also made the Iranian operation visible to American ISR assets, which would detect the aircraft and immediately begin correlating its movements with the maritime component. The Stena Imperialis itself, despite being a merchant vessel rather than a warship, played an active and decisive role in its own defense. The captain's decision to maneuver aggressively rather than allowing the vessel to be surrounded and boarded created the temporal and spatial conditions that allowed friendly forces to arrive and influence the outcome. The use of fire hoses as a defensive tool, while unconventional in most maritime contexts, proved effective at preventing boarding teams from establishing a foothold on the vessel. More importantly, the captain's decision to transmit a mayday call on international maritime emergency frequencies in motion the response chain that ultimately decided the engagement. This demonstrated the importance of merchant mariners' training in anti-piracy and crisis response procedures. The broader strategic context surrounding this engagement cannot be ignored. The fact that nuclear negotiations were scheduled to commence 3 days after this incident created a unique pressure environment for the American commander of the carrier strike group. A more aggressive response that resulted in significant Iranian casualties might have provided tactical satisfaction, but would have created political complications that could have derailed diplomatic efforts. The American decision-makers at all levels had to balance the immediate security imperative protecting American citizens and preventing the seizure of a vessel under American escort against the broader diplomatic objectives that extended beyond the tactical situation. This tension between immediate security concerns and longer-term strategic objectives characterizes much of modern military leadership in regions where American forces operate in close proximity to near-peer competitors. The incident also underscored the value of having redundant capabilities and assets positioned to respond to multiple threat scenarios simultaneously. The American military response, while appearing seamless from an external perspective, actually represented the coordinated action of multiple independent capabilities. The F-35 provided intelligence collection and air defense against the drone threat. The carrier strike group maintained the ability to project power across a wide area and provided strategic stability. The destroyer, positioned independently specifically for this contingency, provided the immediate tactical response. The fighter jets, launched from a land base in Qatar, provided overwatch and escalation options that could be executed if the situation deteriorated. Each of these capabilities, independently impressive, became truly formidable when coordinated through the cooperative engagement capability that networked all sensors and weapons systems into a unified tactical picture. From the Iranian perspective, the operation represented a significant strategic miscalculation. The assumption that the strait could be controlled through a quick operation that presented the international community with a fait accompli had not accounted for the speed of American reaction and the quality of American resources. The IRGC had historical precedent for successful seizures of merchant vessels, but each of those previous successes had occurred under different circumstances. The 2019 seizure of the Stena Imperialis occurred in a different operational environment with different available American assets and different strategic considerations. The Iranian planning process appeared to have assumed that historical patterns would repeat, without accounting for the ways that American force posture had evolved in response to previous incidents. The conclusion of the engagement, with Iranian fast attack craft disengaging and transiting at high speed back toward Iranian territorial waters, represented not just a tactical defeat but a strategic failure of the intended operation. The IRGC had invested resources, coordinated multiple platforms, and executed a tactically sophisticated approach. The operation was designed to seize a merchant vessel and extract diplomatic concessions in the context of upcoming negotiations. The failure to execute this operation operation meant that Iran lost the leverage it sought. More significantly, the failure demonstrated to Iranian decision-makers that the operational environment had shifted in ways that made their traditional approaches to coercion in the strait less viable. The aftermath of this engagement would likely include a detailed analysis by Iranian military and political leadership of where the operation had failed and why. American intelligence agencies would certainly be monitoring Iranian communications and operational patterns for indicators of how Tehran interpreted the engagement and what adjustments they might make to future operations. The intelligence that the F-35 had gathered through its passive sensors, which intelligence professionals would spend weeks and months exploiting, would potentially provide years' worth of information advantage regarding Iranian drone capabilities and command and control systems. In that sense, the American victory extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation and into the realm of strategic intelligence advantage. The incident also served as a powerful reinforcement of American naval dominance in the region and a demonstration of the value of forward-deployed forces, standing agreements with regional allies, and the integration of capabilities from multiple service branches and national assets. The coordination between Navy platforms, Air Force fighters, and the intelligence community had been seamless and effective. This demonstrated the fruit of decades of joint operations, doctrine development, and training. In an environment where near-peer competitors were increasingly challenging American operational freedom, the ability to integrate capabilities across such distances and coordinate actions so effectively in compressed timeframes represented a significant competitive advantage. As the Stena Imperialis transited through the final approaches to open water and the American naval vessels established security around the merchant ship, the immediate crisis had concluded, but its implications would extend far into the future. The incident had reinforced the deterrent value of American naval presence, demonstrated the consequences of miscalculation against American forces, provided a powerful reminder to Iranian leadership that operational success in the strait could not be assumed and that American military capabilities remained substantially ahead of Iranian capabilities in most dimensions. The United States Navy, through the coordinated actions of its personnel, the sophistication of its sensors and weapons, and the wisdom of its commanders in making difficult decisions in compressed timeframes, had protected American interests, preserved international maritime commerce, and reinforced the strategic balance in one of the world's most critical maritime regions.